What do you get when you combine one of the largest flying birds in the world with one of the most spectacular mountain ranges on Earth? You get our final stop in the Latin America Wildlife Edition, a majestic Andean condor standing above the Andes with the snow-capped Cotopaxi in the distance. And while these birds may look complicated to paint, we're going to break it down into simple shapes and build it up layer by layer. So grab your watercolor supplies and let's travel to the Andes. Let's begin by lightly sketching our condor. I'm using different colors of watercolor pencils for the major sections of the painting. This gives me a little roadmap to follow once we start adding color. I know our friend looks pretty complicated at first. There's a lot happening here, but there's a little secret. We're going to simplify everything into basic shapes. Let's start with a circle for the head and a smaller circle for the eye. Then we'll use a couple of curved lines to define the top and back of the head. Next comes the beautiful color around the neck. And this little wrinkly piece of skin underneath the beak has a name too. It's called a wattle. Now let's shape the beak with a couple of longer curved lines. From the beak to where the top of the head, I'll add an M-shaped line to draw what I call the crown, but it's actually called carnucle or comb. For the body, think of a large elongated oval. The wings are basically thinner, elongated versions of that same shape. And to suggest the feathers in the wing, I'll add a series of simple U-shaped marks. The feet can be surprisingly simple too. A few short lines for the legs and curved lines for those impressive claws. See? Nothing magical yet, just circles, curves, ovals, and lines. That's one of my favorite things about drawing. A complicated subject can become much less intimidating when we break it into shapes. Now I'll switch to a green watercolor pencil to sketch the mountains in the background. And for the snow-capped summit of Cotopaxi, I'll use a light blue pencil. The Andes are enormous. This mountain range stretches for thousands of miles along the western side of South America, passing through several countries and containing countless peaks, volcanoes, glaciers, valleys, and dramatically changing landscapes. And Cotopaxi is particularly spectacular. It's one of the world's highest active volcanoes, rising above 19,347 feet, or 5,897 meters above sea level. So we're putting quite a bit of altitude into these little paintings. Now it's finally time for some watercolor. We'll begin with very diluted base layers for each section. I'll add red to the head, brown to the body, and lighter gray tones to the feet. Around the neck, I'll carefully leave the white areas untouched. The same goes for the lower portions of the wings. This is one of the most important things to remember with watercolor. White paper is one of our best highlights. Instead of always painting white, sometimes we simply don't paint the paper at all. Later, we'll use the same approach when we paint the snowy areas of the mountains. At this stage, everything looks pretty light, and that's exactly what we want. We're building a foundation, not trying to finish the painting in one layer. Once the first layer is dry, we can begin adding texture. I'll use a more saturated brush and darker paint to add short vertical marks throughout the body. The direction of the brushstrokes matters here. Following the natural direction of the feathers helps create the illusion of texture without having to paint every single feather. And thankfully, because this is a painting and not a feather counting competition, we can suggest the texture rather than obsess over every detail. I'll add some small curved lines to the feet and claws to suggest wrinkles and texture. Then we'll let this layer dry. While the condor is drying, let's travel back into the landscape. I'll begin with a soft blue wash over the distant mountains. Then we'll introduce a variety of greens, some lighter, some darker, some warmer, and some cooler for the more distant areas. I absolutely love these effects because the mountains begin to look almost like a giant patchwork quilt. And depending on the light, clouds, weather, and time of the day, these landscapes can change dramatically. Now, I'll add varied gray tones to the rocky ground where our condor is standing. And here's another fascinating thing about these birds. Indian condors are built for life in some seriously challenging environments. Their enormous wings can reach roughly 10 feet across, giving them one of the largest wingspans of any land bird. Instead of constantly flapping their wings, they can take advantage of rising air currents to glide for long distances. Basically, they're the masters of letting the mountain do some of the work. Now, we get to the fun part, building contrast. I'll move back and forth between the condor and the landscape, adding a little more color wherever the paint needs it. The head gets deeper reds, the body gets richer browns, the feathers receive darker marks, the mountains gain more variation, and the rocky foreground gets deeper shadows. This back and forth process is something you'll see throughout my paintings. I rarely finish one section completely before moving to another. Instead, I let one area dry while I work somewhere else. Then I come back, look at the painting as a whole, and decide what needs more attention. That's one of the wonderful things about watercolor. The painting almost becomes a conversation. You add a little, it dries, you step back, and then it tells you what it needs next. Now let's give our condor some personality. I'll switch between watercolor and watercolor pencils to add more precise markings, especially around the face. The eye is tiny, but it can completely change the expression of the bird. I'll define a beak, deepen the shadows around the face, strengthen the wattle, and add a more definition around the color. And I am going to use watercolor pencil wherever I need a sharper, more controlled line. I know it may not look like it, but I swear my condor is smiling. He knows he's the star of the show. And there's something particularly special about the Indian condor beyond its impressive size. These birds have long been culturally significant throughout the Andes and have been associated with strength, freedom, and the connection between the earth and sky. Sadly, Andean condors face conservation challenges in parts of their range, making awareness and protection of their habitat especially important. So, this isn't just a beautiful bird, it's an important symbol of the incredible biodiversity of the Andes. Let's continue strengthening the contrast. A few darker feathers marks here, a little more definition on the wings, some additional texture in the rocks, and perhaps a few cooler tones in the distant mountains to push them farther into the background. I'll continue alternating between sections, allowing the paint to dry and adding more pigment where needed. Remember, watercolor doesn't always reveal its finer personality immediately. Colors often become softer as they dry, and sometimes a layer that looked perfect when wet needs another pass once it's completely dry. That's okay. Layer by layer, the contour becomes more dimensional. The landscape becomes deeper, and suddenly those simple circles, ovals, and lines from the beginning start looking like a real bird standing high above the Andes. And there we have it, our colorful and majestic Indian condor overlooking the Andes with snow-capped Cotopaxi rising in the distance. And with this painting, we've reached the final animal in our Latin American Wildlife Edition. What an adventure it has been! We've painted colorful birds, tiny frogs, sleepy sloths, powerful snakes, curious mammals, and creatures swimming through the waters of Latin America. But the journey isn't ending here. This is travel the world one painting at a time, and there are still so many places left to explore. Should our next adventure take us to Africa, Asia, Oceania, Europe, or North America. So many places, so many incredible animals, and so many paintings are waiting to happen. If you've enjoyed this series, make sure to explore the entire Travel the World One Painting at a Time playlist here on the channel and subscribe so you don't miss our next destination. Until then, keep exploring, keep creating, and find joy in the small blessings all around you. Happy painting!